Hey everyone, welcome back to English Without Effort, the show where you just listen and let the language sink in.
Hi, I'm Alice, and today's topic is one that I personally struggled with for years. Speaking English without translating in your head first.
Yeah, and if you've ever opened your mouth to say something in English and felt like your brain just completely froze, this episode is 100% for you.
So, okay, let me just ask you something, David. Do you remember what it felt like in the beginning? Like when you were first trying to have a real conversation in English?
Oh, absolutely. I remember it so clearly. I would be sitting in a meeting. This was back when I was working at a company where everyone spoke English, and I would have a perfectly good idea in my head.
Right. And then what happened?
And then I would start translating it, word by word, from my first language into English. And by the time I had the sentence ready, the conversation had completely moved on.
Oh, wow. That's so relatable. That happened to me constantly.
It's the worst feeling, right? Because you're not stupid. You know what you want to say. But there's this delay, this gap between the thought and the words.
Yes! And for me, it wasn't even just in meetings or formal situations. I used to freeze up even in casual conversations. Like, someone would ask me something simple, like, "What did you do this weekend?" And my brain would just go completely blank.
Okay, that's actually really funny because I did the same thing. Someone would ask me something totally normal, and I would just stand there with this look on my face like I was solving a math problem.
Exactly. And the more you panic, the slower your brain works. And then the silence gets longer and more awkward. And then you panic even more.
It's a vicious cycle. And the thing is, when you're translating in your head, you're not really thinking in English. You're thinking in your first language and then doing this whole mental translation job on top of it.
Which is exhausting, by the way. I used to come home from a day of speaking English at work, and I would be so mentally tired. Not because English is hard, but because I was basically running two languages at the same time.
That's such a good way to put it. You're running two operating systems at once, and it just slows everything down.
So we both know the struggle. And I think what makes it worse is that people give you advice that sounds good, but just doesn't actually help.
Oh, don't even get me started. The number of times someone told me, just think in English, as if I could just flip a switch.
Right? Like, thank you so much. That's incredibly helpful advice. I'll just think in English now. Problem solved.
I mean, it's not wrong. Thinking in English is the goal, but nobody tells you how to actually get there.
Exactly. And another thing I tried that really didn't work was memorizing full sentences from a textbook. I would study all these perfect sentences, and then the moment someone said something slightly different, I had nothing.
Oh, I did that too. I had this notebook full of perfectly written sentences that I had memorized, and in real conversation, I could never use any of them because real conversation doesn't follow a script.
It really doesn't. And I also tried slowing down my speech a lot, like speaking super slowly so I had more time to translate. And that just made me sound really unnatural, and it made the other person uncomfortable.
Yeah, slowing down a little is fine, but if you're pausing between every single word, it actually draws more attention to the struggle.
And then there was the grammar checking. Oh, this one was a big problem for me. I would be speaking, and at the same time, I'd be checking my own grammar in real time, like my own internal editor was running.
The internal editor, yes, that is such a real thing. And the internal editor is basically the enemy of fluency.
Because you can't speak and edit at the same time. Your brain can't do both things well simultaneously.
Right, and so all of these things, the memorized sentences, the slowing down, the internal grammar editor, they all kept me in this translation loop instead of helping me get out of it.
So what actually changed for you? Like, what was the moment when you started to feel like you were actually thinking in English instead of translating?
Okay, so for me, the turning point was something really small and kind of unexpected. I started watching a TV show in English, just for fun, not to study. And I started talking back to the characters.
Wait, talking back to the TV?
Yes, out loud. Like a character would say something and I would just respond to them out loud in English. Whatever came to mind, no preparation, no translation, I would just go for it.
Oh, I love that. Because there's no pressure. The TV character is not going to judge you.
Exactly. And what I noticed after a few weeks of doing this was that I was starting to think out loud in English, not translating, just reacting. And that reaction speed started to carry over into real conversations.
That's such a good point. The key is that you were reacting, not planning. Because in real conversation, you don't have time to plan. You just have to think out loud.
Exactly. And what about you? What was your turning point?
Mine was actually a bit different. I started doing something I call narrating my day. Like, I would just describe what I was doing in English as I was doing it, inside my head, or sometimes out loud.
Oh, that's interesting, like a running commentary.
Yes! So I'd be making coffee and I'd think, okay, I'm putting the water in. I'm waiting for it to boil. I'm a little tired this morning. Just simple, present tense English thoughts about what was right in front of me.
And that's brilliant because you're not translating, you're just labeling what you see. You're building the habit of going straight from reality to English without the detour through your first language.
That's exactly it. And it sounds so simple, but after doing it for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I noticed I was starting to dream in English sometimes, which felt like this huge milestone.
Dreaming in English is such a good sign. It means the language is starting to live in your brain, not just visit.
I love that way of putting it. So let's talk about some concrete things that listeners can actually try, because I think we've both found a few techniques that really do work.
Yeah, and the first one I want to talk about is something I already mentioned, just going for it. And I know that sounds vague, but let me be more specific.
Please, yes, because just go for it is one of those phrases that sounds like advice but needs a little more unpacking.
Right, so what I mean is, give yourself permission to say something imperfect. The next time you're in a conversation and you feel the translation loop starting, just open your mouth and say the first English words that come, even if the sentence isn't perfect.
Because a slightly imperfect sentence that comes out in 2 seconds is so much more useful than a perfect sentence that comes out 30 seconds too late.
Exactly. And most native speakers don't even notice small grammar mistakes. They're focused on the meaning, not the form.
That's so true. And I think the second technique is related to this. It's about chunking it down. Instead of trying to translate a whole thought, you chunk it down into small pieces.
Oh, I love this one. Can you explain what you mean by chunking it down?
Sure. So instead of thinking, I need to say this whole complex idea in English, you just say the first small piece. Like, the thing is, or what I mean is, or so basically. You start with a little phrase that buys you a second to think.
Those are what I call filler launchers. Little phrases that get you started and keep the conversation flowing while your brain catches up.
Yes, and they sound completely natural. Native speakers use them all the time. You know what I mean? The thing is, I guess what I'm trying to say is, these are real, everyday English phrases.
And they do something really important. They stop the silence. Because silence is what makes the translation loop feel so painful. Once you start speaking, even with a filler phrase, your brain kind of relaxes and the words start to come.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got just go for it. We've got chunk it down. What's another technique that you found really useful?
Okay, so this one is the narrating your day thing that Alice mentioned, but I want to add something to it. I call it thinking out loud in English, and you can do it even when you're alone.
Yes, tell them more about this.
So the idea is, whenever you're doing something routine, like cooking or commuting or just walking around, you start thinking out loud in English. You describe what you see, what you feel, what you're thinking about.
And the key is, you don't stop to correct yourself. You just keep going. If you don't know a word, you describe around it. That's actually a really important speaking skill.
Describing around a word. Yes. So if you don't know the word kettle, you say, the thing I use to heat water. And that is a completely valid strategy that even fluent speakers use.
And it keeps you in English, instead of stopping to look up a word in your first language and then translating back. You stay in the flow.
Staying in the flow is everything. And I think that connects to another tip, which is about not starting over when you make a mistake.
Oh, this is such a big one. I used to do this thing where if I said something wrong, I would completely restart the sentence from the beginning. And that just made everything take twice as long.
I did that too. And the thing is, In English, you can just correct yourself mid-sentence and keep going. You say, I was going to the store, and nobody thinks anything of it.
Right. Self-correction mid-sentence is totally normal. It's not a sign of weakness. It's actually what fluent speakers do all the time.
So the technique is, when you make a mistake, just keep going. Fix it quickly if you want, or don't fix it at all. But don't stop and restart. Just go for it and keep moving forward.
And the last technique I really want to share is something that helped me so much. And that's building a small bank of go-to phrases that you know cold.
Oh, tell me more about this.
So these are phrases you've heard so many times and used so many times that they just come out automatically. No translation needed. Things like, that makes sense. I was just thinking about that. Honestly, I'm not sure. It depends, really.
And when you have those phrases ready, they give you little anchors in a conversation. You don't have to build every sentence from scratch. You grab an anchor phrase and then add your specific content around it.
Exactly. And you build that bank not by memorizing from a list, but by listening to English conversations, like this podcast, and noticing which phrases come up again and again.
And then you try using them. You chunk it down. You use one new phrase in a real conversation and you see how it feels. And then it becomes yours.
I love that. Okay, so I want to take a second and just talk directly to the person who's listening right now, because I know this topic can feel really frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say, if you're someone who still translates in your head, that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you're at a stage that every single English learner goes through.
Every single one. I did it. David did it. Every person who speaks English fluently today went through exactly this stage. It's not a flaw. It's just a phase.
And the thing is, you don't suddenly stop translating one day because you decided to. It fades gradually as English becomes more automatic. And it fades faster when you give yourself more chances to just speak.
So if you had one conversation today where you tried to just go for it, where you said something in English without stopping to translate first, that is a real win. That counts.
Even if the sentence wasn't perfect, even if you used the wrong tense, even if you forgot a word and described around it, all of that counts as progress.
And I want you to notice those moments. When you say something in English and it just comes out, without the translation step, notice it, appreciate it, because that's your brain rewiring itself.
That's the language starting to live in your brain instead of just visiting. And every time that happens, it gets a little easier.
So be patient with yourself, okay? You're not behind. You're just on your way. And the fact that you're here, listening, is already part of the process.
Listening to natural English conversation like this is one of the best things you can do, because your brain is absorbing patterns, rhythms, phrases, all without you having to study anything.
That's literally what this show is built on. So you're already doing great just by being here.
Okay, so let's wrap up. The big thing we talked about today is that translating in your head is a stage, not a permanent problem. And there are real things you can do to move through it faster.
The two most important things, I think, are 1. Think out loud in English as much as possible, even when you're alone. Narrate your day, talk to the TV, describe what you see.
And 2, in conversations, just go for it. Use a filler launcher to get started, chunk it down into small pieces, and keep moving forward even if you make a mistake.
And the action item for today, literally today, is to spend 5 minutes thinking out loud in English. Just pick any moment in your day and narrate it in English, out loud or in your head.
5 minutes. That's it. You don't need a special situation or a conversation partner. You can do it right now, after this episode ends.
Try it and see how it feels. I think you'll be surprised by how much English is already in your head, just waiting to come out.
All right, that's all for today's episode of English Without Effort. Thank you so much for listening. It genuinely means a lot to us.
Take care of yourselves, keep listening, and we'll see you in the next one.
Bye for now.